Just continuing on the order of Judge Wine. Judge Thomas Wine of District Court in Commonwealth of Kentucky. And we're dealing with the Justice Department, or lawyers, and Alan Morrison, and with Fox DeMoisy. It must have been 6 lawyers on our side, which is the first time there's some lawyers that are trying to do the same thing on our side. And we're trying to get Judge Wine to lift this temporary order to gag me, so to speak, which is more than that. But of course, this goes on for 2 years, but and then it goes on for another 2 years in the same way, but people don't understand that usually. But it's the same order. And so essentially, Judge Wine's order came into the hands of everybody who ever came around it. It meant that I couldn't talk with my lawyers. I couldn't talk with my lawyers. Simple. So, to just simply review the last piece, there's a CID, civil investigation, which is a deposition for me to appear, and then my date is on March the 31st. Now, I don't know anything that's gone on before, other than I'm sitting there with these lawyers from the Justice Department. We're trying to talk to the judge, just a district court judge. These guys are from lawyer land in Washington. They're with the professionals in the Department of Justice, and there they are on March 31st. And there's a strategy to try to get Judge Wine to lift his order. He comes in once a robe and he appears and so forth. So, then we have questions. What's the question?
Well, you talked to me about Judge Wine orders.
It could be Judge George.
You talked to me about the events of 1993, what they had to do with the order, about the CID, about who else had the same CID.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in this. Before you continue, I really want to know that when did the Justice Department try to intervene in allowing you to speak to them concerning the CID? Again,
I've answered that, but this isn't here. They intervened on the day of, I think it was March the 31st. Now, do you have a follow-up question on that?
Yes. I was interested in that because
I talk on that issue.
Yeah. What day did Jeffrey Wigand speak with the Justice Department then?
And
who were his lawyers?
Well,
was it the same CID?
Yeah, it was the fire safe cigarette, which sometimes gets morphed by.
So what date was that?
Oddly enough, it was on my birthday, on January 26th. And I remember this because I happened years ago to go back to Louisville and read his depositions, and that deposition appeared. And it was, to realize that he was being deposed on January 26th became a significant point, because we didn't know that there was a stalking horse out there. And I realized very late in the game that although he was playing his own role, we were doing things that were setting up Jeffrey Wigand. And Wigand, when he realized that the field was open by the press, which followed September 29th, there was the Louisville press, which followed a number of other stories which came from various places. You can imagine how the press picked it up, and the idea was that documents had disappeared, and of course that was played up. The fact is, I mean, the Wall Street Journal, the Motley Fool, the local journals from Waxahachie, Texas, whatever, they all picked it up. So Jeffrey Wygant had come into his own, so to speak, but he didn't know that in reality what Brown and Williamson was doing, and I'm conjecturing, making a pretty good guess here, that before the 29th of September, when I was sued, so to speak, Jeffrey Wygant was called in, and I believe his biography goes along the lines that he was forced to sign a confidentiality agreement, which was elevated based on some kind of silly facts that didn't have anything to do with him, which he's probably absolutely correct on that one, because they knew they were going to sue me, and if they had two dogs out, and it would be a bad night for him, and so they tied him down before they got to me. In terms of employment status, he had left in the spring, around March of '93. So goodness knows where he had been in the summer, but I'm sure he didn't know any more than what we knew, because he was escorted out of his building in 1993. I believe he was on his own in some way, but from the point of view of the CID, he had somewhat of, he hadn't been sued, but he was certainly under the strictures of the confidentiality agreement. And while we could look back on Lowell Bergman and make some guesses that maybe at this time, a couple of years later, as a matter of fact, actually, this fellow had the same CID. His lawyers, which was part of the pre-lawsuit on me, were to be picked by Brown and Williamson and Whitehair and Combs. And I believe in the transcript itself, when you read it, you can find out he didn't have much to say. It would have been a wonderful thing for me. I would have had a great time with that question if the Justice Department could have actually asked me, and they wanted to. And so on March the 31st, the group set aside, and we had 6 lawyers from the Justice Department, 4 from Washington, all laid out, and I think Reginald Tom made the argument to Judge Wine, and before long, I mean, there you were. And Judge Wine was just sitting there like a lump on a log. Maybe my mother used to say something like that. I don't remember, but he would sit there. He listened. He didn't say a thing. And then toward the end, it was an interesting comment, because he ruled from the bench, as I recall, that no, he wasn't going to allow them to interview me at all, and that was certainly a disappointment to me. I would have loved to be interviewed and loved to have that civil investigation, because I kind of liked fire safe cigarettes, and fire safe issue was like the tail end of everything, but there was somebody out there who really wanted to know about it. And for some reason or other, this could be morphed into a safer cigarette, I suppose, if you wanted to, but they're entirely different things. And of course, at the time, Brown and Williamson was had a new cigarette out called Capri, which actually really was. I mean, we experimented with it while we were there. And it was actually a cigarette that went out, unfortunately. I didn't really want that to happen. But in Jeffrey Wigand's deposition with the Justice Department on my birthday on January 26th, you can read the same deposition. It's in the Louisville collection in the district court. He doesn't really say much, and it's sort of like a textbook answer to the Justice Department. I'm sure that's not all he knew. Maybe he knew more. I'm not really sure he knew more. He sounded like he was working for the tobacco companies at the time. The tobacco companies were essentially putting him, he wasn't working, but he had tobacco company lawyers by agreement. And I think he said that before in his biography. So essentially what you have is a man who is protected by his circle of tobacco lawyers. In the end of our attempt to get something in order to speak to our lawyers, even to my own lawyers, which I couldn't do, Judge Wine ends up, and then he looks over at the counsel at the table where Wyatt is, where Ballantyne and by then King and Spalding, and he says, if I'm not wrong here, correct me, gentlemen, to some extent, this matter has already been taken care of. Is that correct? As though he's taking an order from Wyatt Tarrant, Combs and Brown and Williamson and King and Spalding, and they all stand up and they say, yes, that's correct. We've already taken care of this, so there's no real reason to interview Merrill Williams. Why would you want to do that? I mean, after all, he might tell you something that parenthetically might be important. And I would have told him a great story, because there were so many interesting things about fire safe cigarettes, except the only thing that was not very interesting about it was sort of like the very basic end of everything that you wanted to get from tobacco companies. I mean, it was like sort of like suing for a blood vessel issue when you could have done for lung cancer, and you're basically starting at the head of the thing. And does that answer your question? Basically, what I'm getting into is where Judge Wine has completely cut off very important lawyers, which we would say, I really did. I thought at the time that if you were a Department of Justice attorney, and there were 3 of them, that they would have some precedent over the district court. This is not the case. No. As a matter of fact, by the realities of it, by the time that this came around, there was a lot more going on in Washington, and Judge Wine was being kind of he was being put into a position of being silly. Not only silly, but the larger placement of this was, how can you keep a man or a person from talking with his lawyers on anything? And of course, here's the irony of it. They had Jeffrey Wigand, who had the protection of Brown and Williamson lawyers, telling them, well, I don't know anything. I couldn't possibly come to a conclusion about this whatsoever if I could, with a New Jersey accent. And I'm there just thinking, well, Jesus, I would have been happy with that. Why are you? And then at the end, we get this note, which is sort of like in the middle of a symphony, bong, and we're hit over the head with something we have to think about. What in the world is he talking about? How could this possibly have been settled? Well, obviously, we find out later on Jeffrey Wygant.